there's two aspects of this. So let's look at it first from the purification aspect, which is in the purification aspect, we want to keep the compassion. We want to be able to not judge. And part of the way that we do that is literally through continuing to practice. Why is that the case? Because what happens is that the longer we practice, the more that we will discover within ourselves how much we need forgiveness for ourselves. I've often talked about this experience I had after a serious illness that I had. It was like a life review people talk about with near-death experiences, but I had it not during a near-death experience. And I was able, literally went through things I never would have remembered on my own from my childhood and my whole life. And I was just weeping. It went on for a good 2 weeks. This was not the first time. I had one many decades before where I went through the first really big one, and that was in an out-of-body experience where I was shown that everything I had done, I was 29 at the time, had self-serving motivation. So even the good that I had done had self-serving motivation, and so its value was greatly lessened because of that. This time was probably at least 15 years later, and I was being shown my whole life, and I was just in tears because I was realizing so many things about myself that I had not seen, for which I needed forgiveness. And I remember the all-pervading feeling was, I can't believe I thought people owed me an apology, and I need so much forgiveness myself. It was just so overwhelming. And what happens is we go back and we're told and we see and we experience our other lifetimes. I've been told about lifetimes that, thank God, I was not required to revisit because I don't think I could have handled it, where I was a terrible human being. And then we remember that this is the nature of these worlds that we are traveling in. From the purification standpoint, we can easily detach and love them and try to be coming from the standpoint of providing any type of impetus that might assist a soul if they're in a place of receptivity. A lot of times they're not, so that's to be expected. There is the second part though, which is where we're talking about mercy. That's the first place. There's also justice, and that's different. When we're talking about good and evil and how things are dealt with on an eternal level, justice will do what justice requires. And so when things are happening that require justice, we have to understand that every one of us is called to a different state of life. Some of those who are watching this may be involved in the criminal justice system, and they may be called to participate in providing justice. And they are not to be responding from this first standpoint. They have to respond from the second standpoint, which is that justice must be done. There is always the concept that can be tempered with mercy when appropriate, but there are times when it isn't appropriate. Part of the thing that we do learn in the out-of-body travel state is that these energetic truths behind interactions determine that. How does that determine it? Well, when you're dealing with acts of evil or just dark acts, different levels of darkness, you're dealing with sometimes karmic ignorance, sometimes just genuine ignorance, sometimes just simple darkness, and sometimes pure evil. With ignorance, you're oftentimes dealing with a karmic propensity that someone might have brought in from previous lifetimes. They have a habitual behavior that they honestly do not see in themselves yet. That is probably why they're here, to hopefully overturn and overcome. And that is still ignorance. There's also just ignorance, which we also struggle with to some extent. We don't realize when we're being insensitive. We don't realize sometimes that we have caused pain or hurt. That is ignorance. Sometimes there's ignorance that causes great suffering. We all know of things like this. There's also darkness where people just do things that they know are wrong just because they like to. And then when you're dealing with pure evil, you're dealing with, I commit evil because I like to cause others pain. And when you're dealing with areas of dominant darkness or pure evil, generally the way that the universe responds is simple justice. It's purely justice. That's not tolerated. When there are issues of ignorance involved, then there is sometimes alterations made to accommodate that at times. It does not in any way change the fact that justice still applies to the areas of ignorance, because it does. But sometimes it's tempered with mercy because we all mess up so much that we could end up accomplishing nothing. And so there are energetic alterations that either take place or people are given chances. And this is where things change. It's very difficult to understand the mind of a human being that is not our own, because what we don't understand is the configuration that every human soul comes in with. You can have somebody who is doing things that are really stupid. We can totally acknowledge that they're really stupid, but we don't understand why in terms of the karmic configuration. But we have to understand that energetically, God does. There's this karmic cycle that plays out. And a lot of times when people are just ignorantly doing a lot of dumb things, they just automatically get hit with their own ignorance. But what we have to understand is that this is a world where karmic delusion is more the norm than not the norm. For people to become awake in this world is actually more unusual. So when you see a lot of people driving asleep at the wheel, that is business as usual in a mortal realm. And it is very frustrating. It does not change the fact that what you are seeing is what you are seeing. And there's nothing wrong with having the ability to discern that that's wrong, that's evil. The difference might be when you're in this mode, the mode of I'm in the purification mode, which is okay, I'm not judging the fact that they're evolutionarily where they just don't get it. That does not change in any way what your response should be actually on the ground. If the situation requires that you call the police, you call the police. If the situation requires that they are prosecuted and put in jail or prison, then that's what happens. And that's not being unloving or unkind. Those are the just consequences of those actions, and that is as it should be. This is where sometimes this can get messed up. And we've actually seen some of this recently where good becomes evil, evil becomes good. And people, in an effort to try so hard not to quote unquote judge things, are allowing everyone to run rampant. That is not what not judging your brother means. Not judging your brother means that if someone murders another person, that they still go to prison and they still pay the price for that, but you make the decision that you're going to still pray for them and their soul, and you're going to hope for them and visit them if you're in a position to do so, or if it's appropriate. It may not be appropriate. There are many times where it's not. So you still behave appropriately according to what is happening on the ground. You don't just say, okay, in order for me to not judge them, I don't have the right to respond appropriately to what they are doing. That is not what loving your brother and sister means in terms of not judging them. Not judging them means I don't understand what got them here, and if I'm able to help them in any way in the future through prayer or through action I will try to be available for that if I am called to do so, but I will allow for the proper actions to take place based upon what they are doing. And so you don't cease having law and order in order to not judge the other. Comes back to the root of what we're talking about: purification, discrimination, and discipline. Discrimination is really about discernment. Discernment. And we have to have the ability to discern between good and evil. We have to be able to discern between something that is a positive action forward versus a negative action backwards, or something that will propel us towards an evolutionary goal, or something that will propel us backwards into the darkness.